thanks to my chief of staff, Corey Norman. I only heard the last little bit of his remarks, but he sounds like he covered everything. But I do want to express a few thoughts myself. First of all, please excuse me for not being there in person. I would dearly love to be with you. Brian has worked so hard to make this possible for me to be there in person. And Brian, I'm sorry I'm not there. Thank you for your support. As you all know, we're just really struggling here in Washington, D.C. to get a budget across the line and try to make sure that we don't shut down. And so I'm stuck here. But thanks for inviting me to be with you for a few minutes. You know, just a few thoughts I'd share with you. It seems like if we were to take a room full of Utahns and really a room full of Americans and ask them what they were worried about, they would say things like the war over the Middle East, the war over in Europe with Ukraine. Clearly, they would talk about inflation, the high cost of goods, and the high cost of energy. And what you do, and those of you in this room have an ability to impact all of those things, the things that are most critical to Americans and the things they are most worried about right now. And I hope that you and trust that you know that I'm somebody here in Washington, D.C. that has your back and realizes just how critical you are to everything that's important to us here in the United States, to our quality of life, to our ability to maintain and have affordable, reliable energy costs. And I think in many ways, sometimes the debate is twisted and turned. And if we're not careful, we demonize the very people, and some of you have experienced that, who make it possible for us to have the quality of life that we have. So if you don't remember anything else except that I say today, please remember that I'm grateful for the impact that you have on my life, my family's life, on our quality of life, on low, affordable, abundant resources here in the United States. And of course, so many of them are in Utah. We live in a strange world. We live in a world where somehow it's okay to use techniques that are far inferior to the techniques that you use overseas. We live in a world where it's okay to do far more damage to the environment than you do here in Utah. And it's okay to put massive amounts of emissions out, and it's okay to use child labor. And all of those things are somehow okay as long as we don't see it. And yet, when it comes here to the United States, where our standards are incredibly high, where the way that you work protects and takes care of our earth, we somehow want to put roadblocks in your way. And that's just not something that we can tolerate or allow to have happen. So a lot of my work here in Washington is to try to close this gap that we have between those on the right and those on the left about an energy future. And I think one of the things that's really important to point out is that there's some myths that are just not true. And one of those myths is that in order to be clean, we have to give up our energy independence. And in order to be clean, we have to give up affordable, reliable energy sources. And in order to be clean, we can't mine and do things here at home. And I've found that's just actually the opposite of the truth. I also have found and am grateful for the efforts on all of you to do what you do responsibly in a way that does protect our earth, that does reduce emissions, and all of those things are just incredibly important. Well, I could go on, and I know Corey's covered a lot. I don't know if you want to take just a minute or two for questions. If not, I'm a politician with a microphone, and I can keep going, but don't know if you'd like to entertain any questions at all.
Thank you, Congressman. I think that we would love to take some questions if you're open for it. So,
sure. Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Congressman? Good to see you. Does anybody have any questions for Congressman Curtis? And I know, Congressman Curtis, I have to say that this is always a little bit of a crapshoot with a bunch of minors in the room, because sometimes they get very, very shy when you start asking if there's any questions. But I know we've got at least a couple of folks in here that I would assume would want to ask Congressman Curtis a question. So, Liz, do we?
They can come up to the podium so you can see them.
Or you can shout it out and I can repeat it into the microphone. Well, we got a whole room of smart people here. Don't be shy, guys.
Brian?
Yeah.
Brian?
How's the caucus going?
Okay, so we have Mike Massey here. He's participated in your conservative climate summit a couple of months ago. And he asked the question to give us a little bit of an update on the conservative climate caucus and how things are going there.
Thank you. I always love to talk about the caucus. I'll tell you that tomorrow night in my home, I've invited 50 or 60 of the most far right leaning people in Utah that I can find. And I want to talk to them about this concept of Republicans being willing to say the word climate and using the word climate. And I think it's just incredibly important that Republicans acknowledge that when we're not talking climate, somebody else is, and they're winning the day in the argument. And that conservatives have a path forward that is very responsible. It also reduces emissions. And so that's kind of my message. And here in Washington, D.C., we've started the Conservative Climate Caucus. It now has 85 members. It's one of the largest caucuses in Washington, D.C., which is remarkable if you think about one of the largest caucuses in Washington is Republicans that are willing to talk about climate and actually going on the offensive on it. So it's going very well. These dinners that I've been having with some of our what I would call people that are very, very conservative have actually inspired the possibility of creating a Utah version of the Conservative Climate Caucus, something that would be in the Utah State Legislature. And I can't think of anything I'd rather have happen. I think that would just be fantastic. And I actually believe it's really important for Utah to lead and be one of the leaders on this conservative approach to energy and extraction.
Thank you for that. I had the opportunity to actually attend one of these dinners at Congressman Curtis's house, and he got some incredibly tough questions from some very far right people, and had some conversions by the end of the evening. So that was a great thing to see. And Congressman, if you wouldn't mind too, so you're also a member of the Congressional Coal Caucus, and so that's a unique thing too, that you're the leader of the Conservative Climate Caucus, but also a member of the Coal Caucus. And so can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing on that caucus, and also how the work on those two caucuses align together in your mind?
Yeah, so first of all, I love to tell people here in Washington, D.C. that I have a county called Carbon County. And then my next question is, what do you suppose they do in Carbon County? And I always get a smile here. Listen, for too long, coal, really all fossil fuels, have been unfairly criticized as the problem. And I believe that our resources of coal, of natural gas, of oil, are actually part of our solution, and that they should be that we should embrace the people in the industry, the experts in the industry, and realize that they too want to leave this earth better than we found it, and that they're very committed to that, and they have some amazing ideas. And when we embrace them as part of the solution instead of the problem, we take a really large step forward to solving our problems. And I actually believe many of our energy problems, both in capacity and in cleanliness, will be solved by people from the fossil fuel industry. So to those of you that are involved with that, thank you. And I need your help. And I think the movement needs your help. And I know from my conversations that you're very willing to engage and not afraid of the conversation about coal and emissions and fossil fuels and emissions.
And Congressman, you introduced a bill to push back on the BLM's conservation rule. And would you mind just talking a little bit about that efforts there to try and provide some oversight and stop the overreach from Department of Interior and the BLM specifically on that rule?
Yeah. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Right. Giving a government agency a free hand in without constituent input, without election accountability, giving them a free hand, and that scares me, and I'm sure it scares all of you. So we've stepped in to try to pull that back. And I think, look, I'll be the first to say it. Me and I suspect every single person in the room that's there today wants to make sure that we're preserving and protecting special lands that should be preserved and protected. We just don't want to give a government agency a free hand with no accountability in locking up these lands, because we've seen that bad behavior will come from that, and that they can't be trusted. So we're working hard to make sure that that ability is not there, and that we make good, thoughtful decisions about how we use our land by very responsible people like all of you.
Congressman, Corey talked a little bit about some of the recent troubles in Washington with the motion to vacate Speaker McCarthy's speakership and the intervening period. Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you talk a little bit about our new speaker, and then also too how that's affected Utah? I mean, Utah's pretty well positioned in terms of you being on the Natural Resources and Energy and Commerce Committee. We've got folks on Ways and Means. We've got folks on transportation. And so, how is Utah represented? And then, what are sort of our prospects for working with the new speaker?
So the new speaker was relatively unknown, not just to America, but to many of us in Congress. Now I've gotten to know the new speaker, Mike, because we share a common place in the locker room in the House gym. And so I know him on that level. And I will just tell you, he's a very, very good human being. And if that's a prerequisite to leadership in our country, he's going to get an A grade on that. He's a man of character. He's a humble man, which I actually think is why he was actually given this opportunity. And I think he's the type of person that if you were to sit down and have lunch with, that you would connect with, that you would enjoy your time, not feel like it was stodgy or that he was unapproachable. So all of those are really good things. He was thrust into this position with almost no preparation. And nobody should be surprised that the burden on him is heavy. And the decisions in front of him are difficult. The government's teed up to shut down just a week from tomorrow if we don't pull a rabbit out of the hat. And we've seen before that that's very, very difficult for us to do. So he's facing some very, very large challenges, but he is a good man. And he has this one characteristic that nobody else had, and that he was able to get all of us to vote for him. Nobody else could do that. And so that's certainly a good thing. People are suggesting he's in a little bit of a honeymoon and that he won't be treated quite the same way Kevin McCarthy was, at least at first. And I think that's true. But by next Friday, a week from tomorrow, he's going to have to figure out how to keep this government open, because there are no winners if we shut down the government, and it just doesn't end well. Now, I might just mention really how pleased I am to be part of the delegation here in the House. My other two colleagues, and soon to be, I don't want to be too assumptive that Celeste will automatically win the general election, but I think a lot of people see that coming. So my other two colleagues with Celeste are people who actually enjoy each other and like each other's company, and our strengths and skill sets are very different. And that is a great compliment, because we take different things that we're interested in and that we're good at, and we support each other. So you mentioned we're on Ways and Means, we're involved in the budget and have a ability to influence that. Burgess Owens is Transportation and Education, two very, very important committees. I'm on the Natural Resources and Energy and Commerce, and the Energy Vice Chair of the Energy Subcommittee. Celeste Malloy, when she comes, she wants to be on Natural Resources and also part of the HASC, which is the military, involvement in military, because she has Hill Air Force Base in her district. And we really work well together. We spend a lot of time together every day, and I think it's a really good synergy. Just this week, Blake Moore kind of surprised everybody by announcing that he was going to run for vice chair, and then by winning that position. And it was very hotly contested. A lot of members of Congress wanted to do that. That was the position that Mike Johnson was in before he became Speaker. And so a shout out to Blake Moore and his team. That also will be very helpful for Utah. This is the first time I'm aware of that Utah has had a member of our delegation in the leadership team, and that's very, very important for us. So I'm really pleased for Blake.